when you find yourself, you see, you get to a point in your life, and this is really what I want to share with you here this afternoon, is when you surrender. You literally surrender. You stop the agonizing and the fighting and the struggling and all of the wondering about what you're here for and what it's all about, and you find yourself like there's a gate down here at the end of the stage, and you find yourself sort of on this path, and as you go along, as you travel along this path, you find yourself undergoing these shifts in your consciousness, and it's almost as if you're watching them take place without you even knowing why they're taking place. It's at that point that you come into contact with the idea that there's something more to who you are than just this physical form that you showed up in. And that is, I think of our physical bodies as a parenthesis in eternity. It opens at your conception, it closes at your death, and it's surrounded by eternity. And so you, in the moment of your conception, everything that you needed for this form that you're going to occupy for the time that you have here on this planet at this time was all handled for you in one deliciously, deliriously perfect, exquisite moment which nobody on the planet understands. It's a complete mystery what life is, where it was before, where it goes afterwards, how does it work, like we have sort of a technology of higher consciousness, but in terms of understanding what it means, what life really means, it's just this mystery. So you get to a point where you surrender, where you're struggling and all of this, and you find yourself in relationships, as Shakti was talking about so beautifully, and then you find that it's not necessary any longer to prove yourself right or wrong with the person you're in a relationship with, and that there are going to be people who are not only not on the path that are going to be in your life, but they're not even on an entrance ramp, okay? I mean, they're not, they're just not getting there, and you know that. They're not even in the lane to get over to the entrance ramp. You know that. And they're not going to be in this lifetime, because there are some people that live 90 years, and there are a lot of people who live 1 year 90 times, aren't there? And it's over and over again, the same kinds of thing. And you find yourself, as you proceed along this path, heading towards this gate, that undergoing these changes and not really quite understanding them. And this was happening to me. See, I am now at a place in my life where I know, I don't believe it, I don't think it, I know it, that whatever it is that would constitute a miracle for you that has ever been achieved by any other human being, and even if it hasn't, you are capable of manifesting in the material world that you find yourself. Whatever it is that you think of that would constitute miraculousness in your relationships, in your financial world, in your physical world, in your health, in anything that would fit that category of miracle, you have the capacity to create it. Now, once you know that, you begin to discover that there is an alignment that you have to make in your life. You see, there's two parts to being human. There's this form that we find ourselves in that was all handled in that split second. Like all of these hairs that are falling out was all handled in that second. That has nothing. It's like you get to this point in your life where you watch your form and you watch it on its way to closing parentheses. And it's like you get in back of it or in front of it or underneath it or around it or somewhere, and you sort of just watch it. And another wrinkle will appear, and another drooping will take place that you didn't want. But what happens is that you get to this point in your life where you literally are capable of getting outside of this form that you occupy and coming in contact with another dimension of yourself that you can't describe with words any more than you can describe the experience of water with formulas. You must know it and go within and honor it and get it. And as you do that, It comes about from this surrendering process, from this knowing and this realignment. See, if you align yourself first with the physical side, and then primarily physical and secondarily the spiritual side, then allow it to go through whatever motions it has to go through, but align yourself first and foremost with this invisible part of you. Now, most people don't get this. They don't ever get in their life that this invisible part, this thing that you can call thought or consciousness or soul or whatever it is something that is real. Because it doesn't have boundaries and dimensions like the physical world, we sort of put it aside and give it a couple of hours on Sunday morning. And then when that's over, we charge out of the church lot and don't even let our neighbors in very often on our way home. But it really, what it takes is this realignment. It happened for me when my grandmother died on April the 15th, when she was admitted to the hospital, and they weighed her in her 95th year, and she knew that she was dying, and they weighed her, and she weighed 133 pounds, because it was one of the things that they had to do to fill out all of the forms for the left-brained attendants who run hospitals. Even more important is, what insurance card do you have? And what was interesting, then my grandmother died, and there was this package, this container, if you will. It wasn't my grandmother. It was cold and getting stiff and blue, and my grandmother was this beautiful soul who raised 5 children, who was such a lively, delightful person. And when my mother was struggling in the early days of her life, when she had 3 boys, when I was the last of those 3, my grandmother was there to help out and take one of those boys in, and had one of her boys, her own, was a prisoner of war in a Nazi concentration camp. She didn't even know if he was alive or dead for a couple of years. And she was that person who always was there to iron clothes or to feed or to find the food for whoever needed it. She was a delightful, beautiful soul. And that's who she was. And she certainly wasn't this container. And when they weighed this container for the death certificate, it weighed 133 pounds. And there was such a powerful metaphor in that. That when life passes from your body, as it will, it won't weigh any less as a result. So that whatever it is that constitutes your life is weightless. You can't get a hold of your life and apply the same rules that you apply to the physicalness that houses your body. You can't do that. You have to know that your life is invisible. It weighs nothing, and yet you can never escape it.
It seems to me that I have always known this, and that I came into this world knowing that you become what you think about, whether you want it or not. I was really very blessed. I lived in an orphanage until I was 10, in a series of foster homes, with my older brother, but he was sick quite a bit. He was very anemic, and I used to have to help him as a young boy. He was 16 months older than I was, and this was when I was 4, 5, 6, and 7, and so on. And I can remember I lived out in Mount Clemens, Michigan, at 231 Town Hall Road, with a lady. Her name was Mrs. Scarf, and she had a lot of children would come and go from there. And I was in a foster home because the circumstances at that time were such that my father had walked out on his family, and I was born in the Depression, and there was no welfare and things like that in those days, so it was like people just helped each other out. And my mother was working as a candy girl in Detroit, on the east side of Detroit, earning $17 a week, and she just didn't have the money and wasn't able to provide for her children. So we lived out at this one particular place, and I can remember whenever a new student a new child would come to the house, they would always say, "Go find Wayne." And I would be out in the back. They had orchards there, and this was no hardship. This was no difficult thing for me. This was a great blessing, I think, in my life. Those earliest days. And I can remember a girl named Martha came, and they were dropping her off for basically the same reasons that we were dropped off there. And they said, "Go find Wayne." And I came and I started talking to Martha, and she was crying, and she was all upset, and she was sad, and I was trying to convince her that she didn't have to be sad, that this was, and I remember saying to her, "This is a great place, there's no parents here. You can do pretty much anything that you want. I mean, you've got a lot of freedom, and we're going to have a great time." And I can remember being in school, at the public school. It was a numbered school. They didn't even name them in that day. It was PS number 127, and I remember the teachers, one time we were out on the playground and all the kids were all upset, and I said, "What's wrong?" And they said, "Well, the teacher said this is the worst class that she ever had," and she was so all upset, and she was angry, and she was hurt, and I said, "Well, why would you allow her opinions to have anything to, if this is her hardest day, then her life is just easy," and I can remember talking to other people about, all you have to do is change the way you think. And it goes from being a miserable experience or a tough experience or a hard experience to one that you can do anything that you want with. And when my mother got our family all back together again when I was nine, almost 10 years old. And I can remember her telling me what it was like when I was just a baby, when I was just like an infant, that I was the one child that could make everybody else laugh. At times when everybody else would. She said we were waiting for a bus one time when we were just real babies before I went into the orphanage, and she said a car came by, and it was in Detroit, and there was all this slush, and we all went flying down. Everybody had dirt on them and dirty snow, and we were laying in the ground, and everybody was crying. And she said, "You were and upset and mad because our clothes were wet and so on." And she said, "You just stood up and said, this is great, isn't this wonderful? Look, we don't have to do this, and we don't, just turning it into something positive." It's like, so the ability to be able to do that was something. I can't remember a time in my life when I didn't know that if I really went to work on how I thought, that things just didn't have to be bad. I was the richest kid in the orphanage. I've talked about that many times in my lectures. That a snowstorm was a time we had two snow shovels at the home, and one of them had the edges all curled up from hitting the curbs, and you couldn't make any money with that one. So the other one, when it would snow, I would go downstairs and I would take the good snow shovel and I would put it under my bed, and I'd sleep with it right with me in the bed so that nobody else would get it. And I would get up before everybody else got up, and I would go out and I would just shovel everybody else's snow, shovel their walk. And then later on, and I'd just go knock on the door and just tell them that I shoveled their walk, and some would say thank you, and some would give me a dime, which doesn't sound like much, but that's about $3,000 in today's money. And when I found out that soda pop bottles, for example, were worth 2 cents each, that if you took them back, you could get 2 cents back, that was just like one of the great awarenesses and awakenings of my life, because I would follow people around who were drinking a Coca-Cola and say, "You almost done with that?" They said, "Well, no, I'm not." Well, just whenever you're in, I just followed them and then walked in and we had a coal bin where we lived because it was coal furnaces, and we filled that coal bin with soda pop bottles, and I would take it back. It was just always easy to change, and all the other kids would be not having any money and complaining about not being able to have abundance or be able to have some level of being able to buy themselves like just a little donut or a Pepsi-Cola or something. They couldn't figure it out, and it always seemed so easy to me that all you had to do was just look around and see the opportunities in anything, and it had nothing to do with whether there are opportunities there. There always are opportunities. I'm 67 years old. I have never, ever been unemployed or even can't even deal with the concept of unemployment. It isn't that I've had no job. I've always had more jobs than and it isn't because I've been through all good economic times. There've been some pretty sour economic times over the last 50 years or so. I just have never known how to think any other way then if you change the way you think about things, you can create whatever it is you want for yourself in your life. It's just a simple knowing. I mean, I've made a living talking about it. I've written lots of books about it and so on, but I have always lived it and practiced it, and I still do today. It was Thomas Troward. I don't know. He did some lectures on mental science way back in the 1907, 1908. He was from Scotland. And one of the things that he said is that the law of flotation was not discovered by the contemplation of the sinking of things. So that, like before the 15th and 16th centuries, all of the ships were made out of wood. Not because iron wasn't available and steel wasn't available, but because there was a belief that wood floated. So therefore you had to make ships out of things that floated. That's literally how and then someone came along and said that it has absolutely nothing to do with what things are made out of. It has to do with the amount of water that is being dispersed. That's what determines whether something will float or not. And I think about that all the time, because it's in the contemplation of what you desire that you create what it is that you want to have for yourself. It's in your willingness to contemplate it, and nothing more, according to Troward and mental science. So that I think about the Wright brothers, 100 or so years ago. It's like, and I said the law of flying was not discovered by the contemplation of the staying on the ground of things. So that these were two people, like for me, to figure out how to get an airplane to fly, and my limited knowledge of all of that, I would probably have contemplated the staying on the ground of things. It's like, this is what happened. But there's somebody came along and contemplated the idea that if you get enough speed going and you have the right design and you get pressure underneath something like this, and you get that this thing is going to lift off the earth. Somebody had to contemplate that idea. And everybody who contemplated that it wasn't possible, that it couldn't work, was a part of why flying didn't take place, because there was no new law discovered in the early part of the 20th century, any more than electricity was discovered by Thomas Edison or anyone like that. I mean, the ability to have electricity has always been there. Somebody has to contemplate. So it's like in your own personal life, your willingness to contemplate yourself as a person who is capable of attracting into your life what you want, having the kind of relationships that you want, being able to have abundance where scarcity always exists. All you have to do is begin the process by being willing to contemplate the presence of that in your life. And I've always been a person that I can remember throughout my life as someone who could contemplate myself being able to do things that most people couldn't. And I can give you a good example. When my mother got us all back together, and we were living in Detroit, on the east side of Detroit, and we got a new television set. It was a black and white. It was a screen about this big. It was an Admiral, and we had it in our home, and it was like, oh my God, black and white television. You remember Uncle Milty and all and so on. And there was a guy that was on TV. His name was Steve Allen, and he was on The Tonight Show. And I was 11, 12, 13 years old. I was born in 1940, so I was 51 or 52, and I used to stay up every night and watch The Tonight Show. Even though I had to go to school the next day, there was just something about that show, and all of the characters and smock and all the things that Steve Allen would do on it. And I would come down when I would be talking the next day, and I would be telling my mother and my two brothers that when I do The Tonight Show, this is what I would say. I wouldn't have said what Louis and I say, the way reacted, how he reacted to that. I would have said this, and I used to do this, and my brothers and my mother would say, "That's just Wayne. He's just nutty. He thinks he's on The Tonight Show. He thinks he's going to do The Tonight Show." And I would go up into my room at on this little tiny house that we lived in, a little 2-bedroom house that 5 of us lived in because my mother remarried, and I would see myself doing The Tonight Show. I would just practice it, and Steve Allen became someone that I was really enamored of. Well, fast forward, I don't know, 30 years or whatever, and I've written a book, Your Erroneous Zones, and the Tonight Show calls, and they ask me if I would like to come on and do it. So I do my first stint on The Tonight Show. I did the show like 37 times over a period of 3 or 4 years with all these different hosts, but Johnny Carson was on, and the first guest on the very first show when I did the show was Steve Allen. And it was like something clicked in me that I had contemplated that as a child. I had always had a knowing, and I can remember sitting there talking to Johnny about this thing that, and Steve Allen was sitting there right next to me, and we were talking about that kind of thing. So that by putting my attention on somebody. It wasn't some deliberate thing that I was doing, you know, when I was 11 or 12 years old that was designating that I was going to be a person who was going to be appearing on talk shows 30 years from now. It was just an awareness to, a willingness to contemplate myself in that kind of a place. And I think the power of contemplation is the thing that most people haven't harnessed yet. And when when you harness it in your life, there's absolutely no limit to what you can attract into your life. If you absolutely stay focused on what it is that you know you're going to manifest and attract, you're not going to do it in your time. You know, Jackson Browne sings a song, it says, and creation reveals its secrets by and by. I mean, you can't push the river. You can't, it's all done in divine time, but it will show. It will show. It will manifest. It will attract itself. And I'm never surprised any longer about anything that I put my thoughts on that I can attract it into my life. I just absolutely know that law of attraction and that it absolutely works. And I have absolutely no doubt about it. And I feel as if, like, before I even came into this world, when I was in the world of spirit, that I had a conversation with God. And it was God saying to me, like, what would you like to do in this lifetime? And I said, well, I'd really like to spend a lifetime teaching self-reliance. Because that's truly all I've ever done since the time I was just a little boy, through all my life. I mean, I could just go through all of the things that I've done. It's been always about teaching self-reliance. And God said, it's like, you're sure you want to spend a whole lifetime teaching self-reliance? I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And he said, well, we better get your little ass into an orphanage.
The first of these principles came from a Vedantic scholar in the 10th century. His name was Tilopa. It's not exactly bestseller books, but it's the kind of thing that really excites me, because I think of going back 1,000 years or 2,000 years and reading what some of the greatest minds had to say and how open they were to the potentiality that each and every one of us have for greatness. And this first principle says, as Tilopa put it, have a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. One of the central principles of my life is that no one knows enough to be a pessimist about anything. And that each and every one of us, when we close our mind to what is possible for us or what is possible for humanity, closes off the genius that resides and lives in each and every one of us. Having an open mind doesn't necessarily mean finding fault with all of the things that you've been taught by others. It means opening yourself up to the potentiality and the possibility that anything and everything is possible. So having a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing really means finding within ourselves the ability to get rid of a trait that I find so common in the contemporary world. Do you know that most people that I meet spend their lives looking for occasions to be offended? They actually are out there hoping that they can find some reason to be offended. And there's no shortage of reasons. They're out there everywhere. The way this person dressed, what this person said, they turn on their TV, they hear the news, they're offended by this, someone used language that they didn't like, someone doesn't share the same customs that you, and people all day long. In fact, if you keep track tomorrow, you will find probably 100 reasons that you can go around being offended. But a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing is a mind that says, I'm never looking for anything to be offended by. And that whatever anybody else out there has to say, my response to that is, that's an interesting point of view. I've never considered that before. I remember being interviewed for a morning television show, and the woman that was interviewing me said, how does it feel to be talking to audiences where people have all of these strange beliefs, these weird things that they come to? And it intrigues me, because one of the One of the things that Emerson said is in one of his very first essays, he says the first thing we have to say respecting what are called new views here in New England, where we are right now, is that they are not new, but the very oldest of thoughts cast into the mold of these new times. And that was in 1842. He was speaking about that. And this woman asked me the question, she said, doesn't it offend you that there's people out there and they're talking about people using crystals to heal somebody? And I remember my response. My response was that if I've got hemorrhoids and somebody out there is convincing me that crystals are going to heal them, I'm ordering crystal chairs. Why not? I mean, all you have to do is understand something called a placebo. And what is a placebo? It's nothing more than a convincing belief. If I hand you this pill and say this pill is going to cure your arthritis, and you take it and the pill is just a sugar pill, but your arthritis disappears, I'm into buying those placebos. Where can I get some of those placebos? And it's true of everything. And it's when you think about all the things that we enjoy and what our life is like, it took people who had a mind that wasn't closed to allow us to make the progress that we've made. Progress is impossible if you always do things the way you've always done things. But the other word in this, what Talopa said, is be attached nowhere. Be attached nowhere. Attachment really means I am deluding myself into a belief that if I can't have or if I can't do this or that thing, then somehow I am going to become immobilized. So an open mind that is detached. In my most recent book, in A Spiritual Solution to Every Problem, I have an observation. And it's an observation from Anthony DeMello, a man I respect enormously, a priest, who, in The Way to Love, puts it this way. Here's a great test for your relationships, especially the relationships that you're in with those whom you love, not your children, but your spouses and your lovers and so on. Try this test on for size. 1, I am not really attached to you at all. I am merely deluding myself into the belief that without you, I will not be happy. And 2, and here's the toughest test for non-attachment, I leave you free to be yourself, to think your thoughts, indulge your tastes, follow your inclinations, behave in ways that you decide are to your liking. How's that for a challenge? And so what most of us do in our relationships and why they are not as successful as we would like them to be is that we become attached and we tell ourselves that if this person behaves in a way that I find offensive, then I can't be happy. I make my happiness, my fulfillment dependent upon those people that I love being what I think that they should be. And detachment doesn't mean being a victim. It just simply means I know that I can make my life fulfilled and happy by having a mind that is open to everything and attached nowhere.